What's up, guys? This is the first episode of what I'm just calling the NSBJJ podcast, since that's the name of my channel, so may as well. Might have another name in the future, but we'll see. So today is the first episode of the podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I figured I'd bite the bullet and do it now. So we're going to talk about a couple things today. First off, who am I? So I am a purple belt. My name's Pat. I train out of Forces Training Center in little, and I do mean little tiny place called Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's quite literally on the Atlantic Ocean up here in Canada. And I've been training for about 5.5 years now. I've been teaching kids for over a year in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've been teaching as a coach for about 8 months now. So that's, I guess, kind of a little bit of my background. Going a little farther into that, I started with Muay Thai, actually, the gym I train at now. And when I started, getting me to try Jiu-Jitsu was like pulling teeth. I remember very vaguely, before I started any kind of martial art at all, I actually did do one Jiu-Jitsu class, like maybe 4 or 5 months before I even started any real martial arts. And I remember I went in, I'm pretty much blind without my glasses, and I went in, I didn't have contacts at the time. And I tried a class and I couldn't see anything, and it was not fun. I hated it, and I didn't go back. And then I finally got basically peer pressured into it, I like to say, just kind of have some fun, but basically peer pressured into starting Muay Thai. And I started Muay Thai, and I started out with a couple private classes with the head coach. I had a lot of fun doing those. After a couple weeks, started doing the co-ed classes, and then I loved Muay Thai. It's still my first love. Jiu-Jitsu, in my opinion, like for me, I like more, but Muay Thai is still the thing I started with. So I started in the beginning of September with Muay Thai of 2013. And then in 2014, in I think the first week, it was the first or second week of January 2014, I started Jiu-Jitsu. I signed up. It was, just basically peer pressured by a couple of the guys, by my brother, who started training a couple years before me, and by a good friend and teammate of mine. They were basically, every day I'd come into the gym to do Muay Thai, and they'd be like, man, come try Jiu-Jitsu, like you'll love it once you get doing it. So I finally bit the bullet, started it, never looked back. It's now something I'm trying to make a career. So that's kind of a little backstory on me. I've been a purple belt for, about a year now. It'll be the beginning of July. I'll have been a purple belt for a year. So about a month away from a year at purple, which is kind of crazy to think about. So that's kind of my introduction. So for me, I figured for the first episode, let's talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. And that is teaching kids, whether it's Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, soccer, whatever. But this specifically in Jiu-Jitsu today. So I started teaching kids, back when I was a white belt, I started helping out with the kids' Muay Thai class, because I've been doing Muay Thai a little longer. And then that dropped off. And then about last April, I started helping out. When I was a blue belt, I started helping out with the kids class at my gym, the kids jiu-jitsu class. And I started out, just as some help, right, on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the classes. My brother is the head coach for the kids classes, and I started out helping him out, and then over time have become an actual, like a co-coach. We both kind of have an more or less equal stake in running that class. So I've been doing that for about a year, a little over a year now. And I always say, whenever people ask me, because I teach adults too, but whenever people ask me like what my favorite part of jiu-jitsu is, it's definitely teaching kids, by far, because it's one of the most challenging things I think you can do in jiu-jitsu, especially in a teaching kind of way. And it's also by far the most rewarding. A couple stories that come to mind right off the bat is, we have one kid in our gym who started, I think he started, I can't remember, this whole time frame is a little fuzzy to me, but he started around the same time that I started coaching the kids, maybe a little beforehand. And, he has some, I don't want to say learning disabilities, but he has, again, I don't really know the best way to kind of put it, but he has, a couple very minor learning disabilities, and teaching him is a little bit different than teaching a lot of the other kids. I find for him, you have to, a lot of the time, put his body into the positions, and once you do that, man, takes off, right? Like he gets it just right off the bat once you do that. So learning how to teach different kids, and learning how to really tailor your teaching style for the individual kid is something that has been a really big challenge, but also really, really fun. I can't stress enough how much, actually, in fact, in about an hour here, I'm taking off to go teach our Thursday kids class. So that's been a lot of fun. But I think the biggest thing about teaching the kids is you get to see how rewarding it is once you've been doing it for a little while, right? Like a lot of these kids, I've been teaching, and coaching along with my brother for, a year now. And we've developed, a coach and student relationship where, if they're having a bad day on the mats, some of them will come up to me, or not a bad day on the mats, but they're having a bad day at school or whatever, and some of them will come up to me, and I've made it very clear, or at least I'd like to think I've made it very clear to all the kids that, if they're having a bad day, because it happens to everyone, happens to me, if they're having a bad day at school, they're having a bad day at home, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed, it's perfectly okay to come up to myself, come up to my brother, whoever's coaching, and talk about it and work through the problem, because, you don't work through problems by just letting it stew and bottling it up. That's a great way to make sure you never deal with anything. So, that is one of the great things, is developing that kind of relationship, because you really are, you become a mentor to a lot of these kids. And I think I didn't realize it until relatively recently, but it was kind of a big epiphany for me, and it really kind of, not that I needed it, but it really reinvigorated my love for teaching the kids classes. Also because seeing these kids who come into jiu-jitsu super uncoordinated, can't shrimp to save their lives, and then like a year later are like hitting relatively advanced moves in rolling, and or going and winning competitions or whatever. That kind of stuff is so cool to me, to be able to go and see the progression. And I love that in teaching the adults too, but I think it's just more pronounced when you're teaching the kids, is you get that a lot. So with that said, right, next I want to talk about how to start, because a lot of time I see people post, I'm a big follower of, big follower of the jiu-jitsu subreddit, and I see all the time people ask, hey, I'm a blue belt, hey, I'm a new purple belt, how do I go about how do I go about starting to teach, right? And I would say start with, see if your gym has a kids program, start with a kids program, and see if you can start helping out, right? And to me, it was something where I've known, like, teaching in general in my life, and having a certain level of knowledge in something, to go back to, anyone who knows me, if any of my gyms watching this, hey, most people, especially at my gym, know that, I'm a giant nerd. I spent pretty much the entirety of my teens, doing, raiding in World of Warcraft. And anyone who doesn't know what that is basically, I was getting together with 9 to 20 to 24 other people online, and going in is a collaborative effort for 3 to 4 hours, a few nights a week, and defeating, these big bosses in a video game. And, at the level I was doing it for a lot of that time, it's very difficult, and you have to understand the game mechanics. You have to understand how your specific character class plays. And, I played the same class, the same role for like 8 years. So near the end of my time doing that, I was at a point where there was a lot of people in the class community that would come up, that I talked to and mentor. There's quite a few, I played a protection paladin, and there was newer protection paladins that would come to me and say, hey, how do you do this or this? What are you doing here on this boss, right? Like, I was mentoring people as, a 15, 16-year-old kid that was just good at a video game, and I had people in their mid-20s to 30s asking me as a mid-teen how to do certain things. So I knew from an early age that was something I really enjoyed, and I knew that was something that I wanted to incorporate into my life, whatever way I could. So at the time it was with video games, and now it's with jiu-jitsu, it's with Muay Thai. I help out with the Muay Thai classes as well for the kids. And it's being able to impart that knowledge that you've gained onto these kids, onto these adults. So I'd say first off, start with the kids, because went on a little tangent there, but start with the kids, because the kids class is by far the hardest class you are ever going to teach. I guarantee anybody that. Kids are hard to control, and especially until they start respecting you as a coach, it's very hard to get them to really, respect you and to follow along with what you're doing. And once you have that respect and that relationship built up, it's a lot easier, but it's still not very easy, or a lot of the time, right? So start teaching, helping out with the kids. And then once you get good at that, again, especially if you're like a purple belt, start start asking if you can, maybe fill in the odd time for your head coach for, like a fundamentals class, right? Like for me, I started out, I would fill in the odd day, right? Like, oh man, my brother, who's one of the head coaches, isn't, available for a day. He's out of town, he's doing whatever, and the fundamentals class needs a teacher for a day. So I'd go in and I'd help out, and I'd teach that class. And then eventually it started to become, we need, nobody's really available to teach on Thursdays, well, I'm always, and I'm always filling in on Thursdays, so why don't I just start teaching Thursdays? That was a few months after I got my purple belt. And, so I started doing that. So I started to teach fundamentals classes. And then, currently I teach an intermediate class only because schedule-wise, our Monday intermediate class, I'm one of the only people who can actually like consistently make it to teach. So on a consistent basis. So I do that. So I would say definitely start from the bottom and understand that, especially if you're at a lower belt level, that when you teach, you are not the end all be all of knowledge, right? Like a lot of the time I'll be teaching a class with, a brown belt in the class, and there's times where I will, I'll defer to them. I'll be like, hey, how do you like to do this? Right. And we'll have a conversation about technique. And also a lot of the time, I understand as a purple belt, there's a lot of the little details that I don't know that I'm learning every day. So, a lot of the time I make sure our students take everything with a grain of salt, that, all of us as coaches are always trying to improve as much as we possibly can all the time, and especially as I wouldn't, as lower belts than brown or black, as purple belts, there's stuff we don't know, and there's stuff that in jiu-jitsu that you just need mat time, like a lot of stuff in jiu-jitsu, especially when you get to the higher levels, it's just mat time that you need. And it's mat time that, maybe I don't have yet. But anytime that I teach a technique and then maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months later, I'm doing this technique and I find, oh, I was doing this little detail wrong, fixing it up little bits. We'll go revisit it in class and I'll say, okay, I taught you guys this technique this way. Here's this little addition, or here's this little change that I've made in the last however much time that makes this technique even better. So now we build upon it, right? And as a coach of a lower, not lower belt, but like lower than brown or black, I make sure that I'm always trying to learn, right? It's like I said, anytime we have visiting black belts, I always try and pick their brain. Anytime I have the opportunity to go learn from another black belt, I try and do that. I try and cross-train as much as I can, which admittedly isn't much because of how often I'm at our gym, but I still try and cross-train. So, if you're trying to get into coaching, I'd definitely say if you're a lower belt, like a blue belt, purple belt, like I was when I started to get into it, start with the kids and build your way up from there. I know a lot of coaches, a lot of the time, especially if there's only one or two head coaches that are actually teaching on a consistent basis, it can be kind of tiring for them to say, okay, well, I'm teaching 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and having the odd class covered or having someone to help out during those classes can be a real benefit. So I would definitely say start there and work your way up, right? So I think that's where we're going to end this. Relatively short, just 16, 17 minute first introductory episode. Guys, if you have a name for this podcast, again, I'm just calling it the NSBJJ podcast, Nova Scotia BJJ. If you guys have a better name for it, let me know. And I'm hoping to do these about once every week or so. So hopefully we can get this to be relatively consistent. I know several people in the gym that have expressed interest in doing a podcast, so hopefully get some of them on. But thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you next time.